Good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to Cryptique, where we discuss all things paranormal, cult, UFOs, metaphysical, hidden history, forbidden archaeology, and all things truthful. Please like, subscribe, and share. Socials will all be in the notes. You can email us at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. You can check out our stuff at cryptiquepodcaststore.com. And if you want to help us keep the mics hot, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. Tonight, I'm very happy to have Alan Pearce, a seasoned journalist, broadcaster, and author whose latest endeavor delves into the intricate realms of comas. As the co-author of a captivating new book, co-authored by his lovely wife, Beverly, is Coma and Near-Death Experience, the beautiful, disturbing, and dangerous world of the unconscious. Pearce offers a compelling exploration of the beautiful, disturbing, and perilous dimensions within the state of coma. With a background in foreign affairs and cybersecurity, Pearce's multifaceted expertise enriches his analysis of this enigmatic subject matter. His contributions span prestigious publications, including Time Magazine and the Sunday Times of London, showcasing his profound insight and journalistic prowess. A distinguished member of Britain's Society of Authors and National Union of Journalists, Pearce brings a unique perspective to the forefront, shedding light on the complexities of coma experience. Welcome, Alan Pearce. How are things going?
Yeah, they're going really well, actually. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely.
Nice having a book out. Nice having people being interested in the book.
Oh,
So,
it's absolutely fascinating. I think Ashley is sending me the book. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Oh, you
But
should get it. You will get it. Yeah, if Ashley's sending it, she will.
yeah, it sounds
I mean,
amazing.
yeah, I mean, no one has done this before, which we just could not believe. And we were constantly checking, not covering ground other people have covered.
Yeah,
This is ridiculous that no one has done this before. Anyway, we
it
have,
is.
and we've discovered a whole bunch of really interesting things that people just do not know about.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you're bringing this up because it does seem like, man, everybody was put on a ventilator and, for COVID, and so many of them died. It just, I have to wonder, if they would have followed
Yeah,
some of the stuff that you've kind of brought to light, maybe that would have been a little different. But the medical community is so slow to accept new things, even though, technically this isn't a new thing, but they're so slow to accept like new research or anything. Have you gotten any pushback on this?
not as yet.
Okay.
My other half, B, who's the private eye,
Uh-huh.
is even more cynical than I am. And she expects that we're going to get a lot of stick for this. I honestly don't think we will. We've had some of the finest minds in critical care helping us with this book. At the back of the book, we got 20 pages just listing the medical and scientific literature that the book is based on.
That's
If
great.
anyone wants to say, hey, what you're doing is wrong, I like to ask them, when did they last follow a patient home from intensive care? How did they fare? And can you point me to any literature that advocates prolonged deep sedation? Because there isn't any.
Absolutely. Well,
Anyway,
before we get too deep, can you tell
exactly.
us where you want people to go to purchase the book? I know some people want people to go to their website, some people don't care. Where do you stand on that?
I like people to use bricks and mortar bookstores. I think they're vitally important.
Yes.
And I am told our book is available via every bricks and mortar bookstore that there is. It may not be in stock, but it will be
Sure.
there within 2 days, which is much the same as buying it off Amazon anyway. Always
Mhm.
support your local bookstores. But I'm told the book is available absolutely anywhere, and coming very soon is an audio version as well, which should be interesting. I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, I heard you talk about that on another podcast. Now, are you going to narrate because you have a great voice? A lot of times I'll get a book and then it'll like I just don't like the narrator. So are you going to
Yeah.
do your own?
Um, No, absolutely not. It's been done by the most wonderful South African actress, Danny Painter.
Okay.
We did this Coma podcast where we had voice artists voice some of the Coma stories, and
Mhm.
Danny was the first we used, and she blew us away.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm a former broadcaster, but I have certain skills and I don't have others. You know, I can file a report from the front line or something, but I cannot read the news. And I don't think I could read an audio book. I just don't think. Also, I haven't got the stamina for it. This is the
Yeah.
other thing. I mean, let's take, you know, if you sat and read this book and didn't get up, it takes about 12 hours, you know, and it would take me like 48 or I don't know, 144 or something to actually record this. So no, I'd rather not. See,
Well,
that's just somebody else.
well, that's fair. I totally get that. So, you have some other books out. Can you just tell the listeners about the other books that are available to you before we get into this latest one?
Yeah, I used to be a journalist that covered wars and so on, and I had a
Mhm.
slight mishap in Afghanistan,
Mm.
and wasn't very functional for a while. So I got into the internet very, very early on. And at some point, my wife, being a private investigator, we were having dinner with one of her clients, who's a police special branch officer. That's like our special forces in the police.
Fair
And
enough.
he started talking of all the things you can't see on the internet. And I'm thinking, hang on, this is really interesting. And he
Mhm.
realized he was giving too much away. So I
Mhm.
kind of reversed engineered it and worked out how you can operate under the radar on the internet, because this is an incredibly useful skill for journalists
Yeah.
and also for human rights lawyers and others. And I learned these things and then I started writing books about them. And prior to COVID, I was giving a lot of talks.
Mhm.
But since COVID, all of that has dried up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit of a jump from the darker side of the internet, as it were, to this. But I have always specialized in subjects that have not been properly covered.
Mhm.
And when I was writing the deep web books, as it were, no one was actually doing that. So I think it was
Mhm.
certainly amongst the very, very first. With this Coma book that we've just published, no one has ever touched this subject before, which
It's
seems just
crazy.
truly, no, it's just truly ridiculous. Um, the events within coma that people experience, according to doctors, they're not supposed to experience them.
Mhm.
Therefore, they are false memories or hallucinations or delirium. End of story. So they
Mhm.
don't want to go there. Because of the way critical care medicine works these days, it's become a conveyor belt of care
Mhm.
where everyone's so busy they don't get to look over their shoulder at the product coming off the other end. They
Mhm.
don't see the damage that they're causing. So people who leave intensive care get moved down the line. If you've been on a mechanical ventilator, you've damaged your vocal cords invariably
Mhm.
and can't speak for a week or 2 weeks, longer in some cases.
Mhm.
So the people within critical care never get to speak to the patients. They never
Mhm.
see the damage that they're causing. We'll talk about the damage in a moment, which is substantial.
Yes.
And they're placing them into medically induced comas for a variety of reasons, for almost the majority of reasons, if you find yourself in intensive care.
Mhm.
We have scoured the medical literature. We've done a thorough deep dive on this one. It is only recommended that people are placed into medically induced comas if they're suffering a brain seizure and you need to switch the brain off to prevent damage. But
Okay.
this is only for a very short period of time. It's minutes, not even
Mhm.
hours, really. Certainly not weeks or months. If you've got a certain kind of injury, such as abdominal, and they don't want you moving about, they will place you for a short period within a medically induced coma.
Okay.
If you've got certain complications following heart surgery and they want to divert as much oxygen the brain uses a lot, divert it to the heart, they will again put you into a medically induced coma. Outside of that, there should be no reason, because the medical literature is quite clear about this. Only those circumstances. When
Mhm.
COVID hit, people just didn't know what to do.
Everybody
And
lost their minds.
no one knew. And everyone's scrambling around, you know, on various social media
Mhm.
platforms, asking other doctors and nurses, their colleagues and friends, what are you doing? And the only thing they could really liken it to was a thing called ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is invariably fatal. So
Mhm.
what they've done with ARDS patients in recent years is help them breathe. They put them on a mechanical ventilator. To make them comfortable, they've doped them up to coma levels. They're oxygenating well. They're going to die anyway. They appear peaceful. Let it be. With COVID, they thought, well, it's a similar range of symptoms. This is all we can think to do. Plus, everyone's burning out. Staff are just so overwhelmed that they just can't manage the sheer number of people coming in. So it appeared expedient to knock as many of them out as possible. Something like 80% of coma people, COVID people that found themselves in intensive care were placed into coma. And I have to say, needlessly, and since COVID, because there's been, I've got a beep going on my computer. Let's get rid of that. Since COVID, there's been a lot of research because it's basically a question of scale, because so many people globally were placed into a coma. You can see the scale of the damage so much more clearly now.
Yeah.
Now, the damage falls into two main areas. There's mental cognitive harm.
Okay.
And this bizarrely is caused by sleep deprivation within a coma, which we can talk about. And the other is the lack of mobility, that people are there for so long. At best, they're being flipped over every 2 hours to prevent bed sores, but they're not exercising their body in any shape. So they've got appalling muscle wastage, joints are calcifying, you've got skeletal damage, and tens of points are being knocked off people's IQ. But because this doesn't become immediately apparent, people just don't notice it. And when people, when they are recovering and they're talking to people about how they feel post-coma, people are a long way from intensive care. People are saying things like, well, it's the drugs. That you've got to accept that you were drugged up to the eyeballs recently. This would account for the weird things you've dreamt within your coma. And it would also account for the fact that you have a bit of brain fog. Well, turns out that this isn't brain fog that they keep calling it. It is, in fact, permanent damage to the brain. Now, when you place someone into a medically induced coma, it's a bit like unplugging your desktop computer and expecting it to function in some way, because it will not. The brain will not go through its circadian rhythms. You do not experience REM sleep. If you're REM sleep deprived for, say, 3 days, you are teetering on the edge of sanity. Use university as a torture. Now, the best one in the world, doctors and nurses are placing people in intensive care into a sleep deprivation situation, thinking that they're doing the best thing. When doctors refer to coma, they always refer to it as sleep. The word coma comes from a Greek word meaning deep sleep. So just from the get-go, everyone's thinking this is sleep. This is the last thing that's happening to people. One of the doctors in the book that's helped us, Dr. Wes Ely of Vanderbilt, he became early on very concerned about what was happening to some of his patients post-coma and decided to really investigate. One of his patients, she was a mathematical whiz. And when Dr. Ely got to talk to her post-coma, she was struggling with everything. And she couldn't even add up her checking account. This seriously worried the doctor. So she'd had an IQ test prior to the coma some years before and got a whopping 140 IQ. Astounding, genius level. So Dr. Ely had an IQ test carried out on a post-coma. It came in at 100. 100, which is rendering her effectively mentally subnormal. They put it into an MRI scanner. This never happens. People don't ever do this. He just wanted to know. But here's a young woman of about 35. The scan is showing the brain of an old woman with dementia. Parts of her brain had shriveled because of the effects of being in coma for so long, having everything switched off, things not going through their natural rhythms. Additionally, because you're not having your natural rhythms, your kidneys are not going through their 24-hour cycle. All the drugs that they're pumping into your system are not being processed in the way they should be, so they're staying within your system. Oftentimes, when somebody's brought out of a coma, they just don't come to. They don't come to for an incredible period of time. And it's because they're so drugged up. And then after the event, they're getting withdrawal symptoms from they don't even know what.
Oh,
And you've got drugs being used in coma, such as propofol,
mhm.
which this is a drug which is supposed to have killed Michael Jackson, the king of
Right.
pop,
Mhm.
and is known to cause shocking memory problems. It causes myalgia, which is aches and pains throughout the body. And these are symptoms that coma survivors are reporting as a matter of course. And
Wow.
when this is not being processed by your kidneys, they're still in the system. And it's going to
Yeah.
take a long time for that to clear out. Other times when they try and bring people out of a coma, they come out kicking and biting, and they're
Mhm.
pulling all the tubes out of them. The reason for this is they are not deeply sleeping. They're, they are oftentimes trapped in nightmarish worlds that
Mm.
defy all belief. In clear consciousness, these are nothing like dreams
Mhm.
whatsoever. I'll give you one example. James, who helped me with the book,
Okay.
he found himself caught in loops, certain events looping over and over and over again. And this is a common theme that people report within coma, that they're trapped in these loops, often hellish, beyond nightmarish loops. So here's James in the room watching his wife, not of this world,
Mhm.
watching his wife dying in childbirth over and over and over
Oh
and
my
over
gosh.
again. They bring him out of a coma, and let's say he's at that point, he is desperate to get out of that world.
Right.
One survivor, Kiara, told me when she came to, she was coming out of some very strange existence, and she was desperate to cling on to anything of this world. And she found herself ripping all the tubes out of her, and there's blood going everywhere. And she's desperate to hang on to this world. What do they do to her? Because she's in a kind of panic situation, they turn up the medication and they push her straight back into this nightmare world.
Mm.
But the thing is, they don't know it's happening. They don't know. And if anybody ever gets to recount these things to someone working in intensive care, they just simply say, I'm sorry, that's a false memory. But for
Mhm.
James, watching his wife dying in childbirth over and over again doesn't have the ring of any kind of memory,
Right.
because he's actually trapped in a scenario. He's not remembering anything. So
Right.
they say these are hallucinations or delirium. Well, if you're in a coma, you can't hallucinate because it's a conscious state, invariably with the eyes open. And the same goes for delirium. You can't be unconscious and delirious.
Mhm.
So the medical world are up against a brick wall here because they do not understand consciousness.
Mhm.
The medical world that we're in is called materialistic science, as is. They can understand things if they can weigh them, measure them, slice them up, and put them under a microscope.
Mhm.
Anything they can't do that to, they can't concern themselves with. So they've got
Right.
their own self imposed brick wall here. When
Mhm.
it comes to consciousness, something we're all experiencing minute by minute, they can't begin to explain it. They've got
Sure.
theories, which are no more than ideas and guesses.
Right.
And yet they send people to the deepest depths of consciousness within a coma. People come back with stories that would just blow your mind, and they're dismissed as a false memory because they cannot comprehend any level of consciousness, and
Right.
certainly
Yeah.
not the one that they're sending these people to. It's just beyond their understanding.
Well, I would think too that when someone wakes up, they or wakes up as being coming out of the coma. How do they know they're coming out of the coma? They might think they're going into a different nightmare world, or maybe
Oh
they
yeah,
think that the coma state is the real world, and what they're
yeah.
being brought back out of is a dream world, or a false memory, or whatever they would say.
That is so true of so many different events that people experience. One of the strangest, and they're all strange, so it's hard to say one's stranger than another. But
Sure.
a number of people recount to me, and I know many, many more have had this experience,
Mhm.
that within their coma, they've lived an alternate life. Now, take Nick, who's in the book.
Mhm.
Nick he caught pneumonia, turned to sepsis. Hospital said, looks very dodgy. We're going to put him into a coma. They put him in a coma for 2 whole weeks.
Mm.
Within that time, Nick lived an entire other life.
Wow.
He like he lived in the 1960s and 70s in the American Midwest. He had a completely different profession. He was really good with his hands, whereas in this life, he can't even change a light bulb. He had a completely different partner, a new baby girl, and just a normal life. At some point within that normal life, he feels very unwell and is possibly having a heart attack or something of this order. When he opens his eyes, he's in a hospital room, no surprise perhaps, except there's a whole family there, overjoyed to see him, and he hasn't got the first clue who they are. And he can't speak to them because of the damage to his vocal cords and saying, hey guys, I think you're in the wrong ward. I don't know who you are. And they're saying, hey, Nick. And he's wondering who the hell is Nick. And
he didn't even have the same name or anything like that. It just
No.
Wow.
And he didn't know that this was a real world. He was convinced he had left his real world. And for so many, they don't even remember their world, this world, prior to the coma, or it's in bits. So when they come back, they have to pretend to be the person people expect them to be. They don't feel like that. Nick, for this, for example, in this world, he owns and operates his own pizza parlor. It's not a franchise, his own business. And it's like, fully into that world. In his coma world, he could repair anything. And when he came out of his coma, he found he could repair things, whereas before he wouldn't even know how to change a fuse.
Wow.
He's fixing his car. He's fixing his neighbor's lawnmower. He's fixed his partner's heating and ventilating system. He does all these things, and he doesn't know how he can do them. Wow. So he's not entirely convinced that he's in the right world, as it were.
Yeah.
Others have told me that they felt they're lost in time, that this doesn't feel like the right world. Others come back and they say, it's almost like I'm in the plot of the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where everything kind of looks the same, but everything's off kilter. Nothing feels right. My friends and family now feel like actors pretending to be my friends and family. And they don't feel right in this world at all. So many have told me, particularly the ones that have beautiful experiences, which happens frequently within coma, that they wish they had died because they'd never been so happy or so at peace with themselves. And then they found themselves, for whatever reason, back into this body, back into this world. And then when they come out, here's Nick not knowing who this family are. Others have told me she didn't even know what humans were. Wow. And the language that they have lost, what is the word for that? It's a chair. What is the word for this? How do I use this? That's a fork. And then they can't stand up and walk anywhere because they've got appalling muscle wastage, and they're in a terrible mess, and no one's listening.
I can't imagine, even aside from possible organ damage from all the drugs they're pumping you with, and on top of losing your ability to walk and having to relearn so many things, just the psychological trauma of something like that we talk about, I don't want to put things on like a scale of what's more traumatic or what's less traumatic, because everybody has their own experience. But if something like this happened to me, I would think that I'm crazy. And I mean, this is like a lifetime in therapy. If you're lucky enough to survive and come out of this, it just seems like a lifetime of therapy, and it's just an awful experience. Have you looked at the numbers? Are there a lot of people, statistics wise, that come out of a coma and have these kind of things, these memories of a past life or whatever, that end up wanting to harm themselves?
Here's the thing. No one is paying any attention. So no one's really logging what's happening to people post the coma. They're just not. I mean, okay, they go back and they see someone. Yes, they have all the symptoms of PTSD, which they incidentally believe is caused by being in intensive care and not the horror show of being in a coma. And, you mentioned, like, do people feel they're mad? Almost everyone that I spoke to, I think, had said in one way or another, I felt I'd gone mad. I was crazy. I was nuts, all the rest of it. Because so many of them, when they come out of this, they think they're the only one, because they're told, first off, right, there's no memories, right? They're just false. And they're thinking,
Right.
I've had an experience spanning decades that was more real than this current world.
Sure.
So I'm having trouble with that one. And I mean, they're just lost. They don't know who to turn to necessarily. A lucky few will find groups on Facebook, for example, such as the Coma Survivors group, where people will share accounts within Coma. And also the subsequent journey after Coma. And suddenly you realize you're not alone. I did not go mad, that these so-called coma dreams are a thing. And I feel much better about it, a lot of people. The majority don't even know these groups exist because they think they are suffering alone.
Yeah.
They just do.
Sure.
And because when things, particularly they're ghastly, the events, some people, the events within Coma are so ghastly, they can't really bring themselves to tell anyone. How, for example, there's the James just now with the wife dying in childbirth, others hanging from meat hooks and so on, others living for 4 years in a coffin in an organ harvesting facility and can say 4 years. And they could say that I had my uterus removed 7 times. That level of detail, and be told this is just false memories, and then there you are on your own with no one to talk to about it. You just think you have gone mad, and that's the end of it. And the best that will happen to you, which is probably the worst thing, is they give you some antipsychotics rather than the opportunity to talk to someone who actually understands the experience up to a point, because no one fully understands the events within Coma, because they are levels of consciousness which cannot be fathomed at this point in time. There are, however, certain triggers for events within Coma. People experience the near-death experience is very, very common. When you think about it, you're in intensive care, they place you into coma, you are near death to start with. The drugs are going to push you that much further.
Right.
So when you look at the traditional idea of a near-death experience, people in beautiful countryside, there's maybe a stairway to heaven, maybe they meet dead relatives, etc. All of these key elements have been recounted to me by coma survivors. So these are very, very clear things, and these are taken very seriously, increasingly seriously now, particularly as we're looking at artificial intelligence and trying to get a better grip of the workings of the mind. But certainly I've lost my train of thought, because certainly for the patient, they're just lost. And we are hoping, I mean, one of the key elements of the book here is that, you'll find out about this book and you'll say, whoa, hold on a second. I've had these experiences. You'll realize that everything you've been told by the doctors and everybody else, they've only fobbed you off, particularly about the physical ailments that occur after coma, because there's so many and they are so similar, regardless of why you went to hospital in the first place. These are all provably hospital-acquired conditions not covered by medical insurance, so they don't want to talk about it. That's it. Here's a funny thing. You'll notice increasingly that if you go into hospital for an operation, in the past they would have given you a general. Now they're trying to encourage you to have a local anesthetic where possible.
Sure.
This is because they are noticing damage to people, even for short operations, let's say 4 to 6 hours for a bypass or something. They're noting substantial cognitive damage. In point of fact, when they put you in on an operating table and they knock you out for this period of time, it's the same drugs as they give you in coma. So you are effectively in a coma. Many a time, and this is not taken seriously, many a time people on the operating table will find themselves coming out of their body and can recall accounts from within the operating theatre that they should not have been party to, such as reading the monitors going up to a certain level or down to a certain level, watching the panic that may be going on, watching a particular procedure that's happening that they shouldn't even know anything about. Now, there's several of those in the book. This is all too common. And whether they're waking up to we are entering realms that we do not know here, or whether they're just alarmed at the cognitive harm that is being caused by short terms of this sedation, I'm not sure which is which, but they are alarmed. If this is happening over a short period of hours, and you're giving the same meds to somebody for, say, 3 months, the effect is just obvious. I mean, it's
Yeah.
blindingly obvious.
Yeah.
Remarkable that no one picks up on it. And this is where we come in, as coming in from the outside, having no preconceived ideas, either about whether this is a medical procedure that works or not, where people are going within their coma, having no preconceived ideas, as in, yes, this is all nonsense. It's like fairies at the end of the garden, but keeping a perfectly open mind. And we've discovered things that are just there for the discovery.
Sure.
It's blindingly obvious. You go to a Facebook's coma survivors group, you can see people are having events within coma. They're patently not little blips or something. I dozed off and had a funny dream. It's nothing like that. Why have they all got the same symptoms? Why have they plagued with aches and pains and balance issues and huge gaps in their memory? And alarm bells were ringing while I'm looking at this, and you think somebody else should have found this way before we ever came along.
Sure. Well, I mean, people may have found it, and like you said, they're just like, nah, we don't want to talk about this part. We'll just push this aside. I mean, I can't, I don't want to call into question, anyone in particular's integrity or anything like that. But, we have seen a lot of strange things in the medical field all around the world where, yeah, they think if they just don't talk about it, they just push it to the side. No one will ask questions. I mean, think about before the internet. How are these coma
Oh,
survivors coming together? They had to
never.
be completely isolated.
No, and it's so funny you say that because all the research for the book was conducted during lockdown. So
Hmm.
we had to rely entirely on the internet. None of this would have come to light without the internet. And
Hmm.
as you say, coma survivors would be entirely on their own. There's nowhere to possibly turn.
Yeah.
So yeah, could actually write a book about this. Hey, look, we found a great use for the internet. It's doing something positive. But
For a
it certainly
change.
has in this case. And
Mhm.
for us, we were able to find people who would otherwise be gainfully employed on forums and so forth, able
Sure.
to answer questions quite quickly and getting into a dialogue in a way we never would have done during normal times. So it helped us. And again, as I said earlier, that the sheer scale of the damage has become apparent because
Mhm.
so many people, 80% of those possibly that found themselves in intensive care, were placed on a ventilator, were knocked unconscious.
Mhm.
A vast number of people died. The medical literature is so clear on this that the procedure is lethal.
Mhm.
If it has to be done, it has to be done for very, very short periods of time, not for weeks and months at a time, which is clearly
Mhm.
what's happening. And I said that when people come out of coma, that sometimes they're fighting and biting. But the first
Mhm.
reaction is to send them back down again. But
Yeah.
this goes on from shift to shift.
Mhm.
I'm not going to wake him up. He was as crazy as you can be. I'm
Mhm.
going to leave this to the next shift. Next shift has the
Mhm.
same thing to say about that patient. And that patient will stay in that coma for way longer than I was going to say than they
Wow.
need to, but they don't need to in the first place. So they're just exacerbating the problem through a total lack of understanding. And it's as simple as this. Everyone is so overwhelmed by the work that they have
Mhm.
to do in intensive care. So many of the real skilled people, the people that are waking up to the damage being caused in intensive care, they burned out and left the profession fairly early on in COVID, so many of them. And
Mhm.
people came into intensive care from elsewhere in the system who actually had no idea what to do. Oftentimes today, there are people in intensive care, and it's not their first choice. They'd rather be in
Sure.
pediatrics or something,
Sure.
but they're doing this because they have to do it.
Mhm.
And they do what they're told. And the hospital system says, we're strapped for cash. We are short of staff. Instead of the usual, in an ideal world, 2 nurses to 1 patient in intensive care, watching caring for them minute by minute.
Mhm.
Now we've got 1 nurse dealing with multiple patients. And
Mhm.
it looks like, oh, that's cheaper. But that poor nurse has got to flip these lumps of meat effectively every 2 hours, keep changing the drips, running around, and suddenly that person is overwhelmed. There's no satisfaction in having such a large number of patients die. And you
Mhm.
don't even get to know your patients. It's just
Yeah.
like being in a sci-fi movie where everyone's in stasis. You're not going
Right.
to You're going to get to know them. They're not going to get to know you. They're not going to be invested in their own recovery in an ideal world where they would be. They're just out for the count. And the doctors and nurses are doing today what they're told to do. This is what our supervisor says to do.
Right.
There is no literature that they can go to and say, yeah, okay, this is a great thing. The reason we put people into a coma is, they get lots of deep sleep. There's nothing saying this. We approached in our research the editors of the medical journal, The Lancet, and we said, can you point us to any articles you published advocating prolonged deep sedation in intensive care, i.e. coma? Took a few days, came back to us and said, no, none. We haven't published any ever. Isn't that weird? They gave us access to their archives. I mean, ridiculous amount of material, but we have 50 years to go back since this has been used. So we plowed through this. There is nothing in there advocating prolonged deep sedation, nothing whatsoever. The medical literature, all of it cries out for don't do this because all the damage, physical, mental, and the fact that mortality is remarkably high, either there within coma or within a 6-week period of being discharged from hospital. No one's looking.
Yeah. Well, I got to think too that it's kind of like where they said, if you get the COVID vaccine, anything that happens after 15 minutes is not related to it. So I got to feel like they're like, we brought you out of the coma. It's been 2 weeks. Anything after that's not related to it at all. And, I think I had heard you mention that you lose 40% of your lean muscle mass by being on bed rest for a week. Well, what happens to your diaphragm when it's not working for 6 months? It's just
all those muscles. Yeah, that they've had a holiday, and they've been working.
And then you come out and you can't breathe on your own.
But they've been working against their will in a way because the machine is breathing for them. When modern ventilators, they're microprocessor controlled. And they allow the patient to initiate breathing. It's not like being on an iron lung or something where, air's been pumped into you, sucked out. It's not like that. It's actually quite a comfortable thing. So people can be awake and do this in the way that, since we've been sitting here, we've not thought about our breathing for 1 second.
Sure.
When you come out of a coma, or when you come out of having, say, the vent installed, and you've been down for, say, 20 minutes or so, you're going to be aware of this. But people are distracted. You give them something else to think about. You give them a gentle amount of medication. You have a loved one holding their hand. And before you know it, just like us, they're not thinking about the rhythm. They're setting the rhythm, and the machine is working for them. And this is the key of how to do it. But no one's reading this up, and they're just not. It just blows my mind. But it's so easy to see why, because they don't see the damage and they're all too busy. And what will happen ultimately is that the people who are working in intensive care now will move on. Some will retire.
Sure.
New people are coming into the profession. And I find this really, really heartening. Certainly in the US and possibly in Britain too. More people are choosing to become doctors and nurses than before the pandemic. I'd have thought the opposite.
Yeah, me too.
For many people, to be in intensive care, it's like the special forces of of medicine. It's the sharp, pointy end, and it's where all the drama and excitement are. And a lot of people are drawn to that. And as they move into that world, they'll be reading all the new literature, everything that we've learned since COVID, and they will not think for 1 second to place somebody down longer than they need be. The key thing they will do is get them up and about, get them mobile, because lying in bed, as we've just talked about, causes such damage to muscles, to nerves, to joints, to all sorts. And you get them up. And what happens then is, if people start to get anxious or whatever about their environment, or they're worried generally, by giving them something to do, just walking a few steps on a frame and getting back into the chair, then get back into bed, it makes them naturally tired, and then they have a comfortable sleep rather than just being sent out to oblivion where they're not sleeping at all. And it's doing them absolutely no good, but infinite harm.
Yeah. Now, I believe I heard you talk about uh, seeing or possibly visiting, but at least seeing I guess an intensive care unit where people are actually up, like playing volleyball. I'm assuming with a
Yeah,
beach
yeah.
ball or something.
That
I mean, we
that was
see that, helping people with dementia, getting them physically active and getting their brain, okay, well, I've got to move this hand over here. I've got to, it helps them out. And I can't imagine the difference of being in a room like that and being in a room where everybody's just almost dead. It's such a dichotomy, and you're right. It just has to be 100 times better to be awake and still be experiencing life, knowing like, hey, I'm gonna get better. I can do this.
yeah,
And my
yeah,
friends and
yeah.
family and my people that are going through the same thing with me are all here. I can talk to all of them. They're a support system for me. So is that something
We've learned.
that's
So, oh yeah, yeah. We've learned so much in the putting of this book together. There's a thing that you forget even being in a coma. Just think of yourself in hospital,
Mhm,
particularly, let's say, in intensive care. You get a thing called ICU delirium, when a bunch of things will start happening to your mind. You'll start seeing kangaroos in the room, for example, or a whole
mhm.
group of footballers will come to say hello, but they're not. They're not there at
Right.
all.
Yeah.
Now, when we look at what happens in other circumstances, people in solitary confinement in prison can experience a thing called the prisoner's cinema, when they start seeing kangaroos and other people and whatnot in the
Mhm,
room. The longer they're in this situation, the more realistic it becomes. They might find themselves talking with other people face to face. They might
mhm,
find themselves in other realities. This is what's happening to people pre-coma in an intensive care unit, and it's simply because there is nothing to
mhm,
stimulate the body, to stimulate the mind, or optically to give them
mhm,
something to look at.
mhm.
And just learning that and just seeing what the triggers are, it's so obvious, blindingly obvious, that this is what's happening to people in intensive care. So I'm not saying you have to have clowns come in or something, but you keep people active throughout the day. But why not have clowns come in? In
Yeah.
some hospitals where they're working to keep people awake and active throughout the day, they're introducing things like pet therapy. People come in
Mm,
and do their hair. People put
yeah.
them through like gentle yoga style, yoga moves and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And they can have a laugh with the nurses, the difficulties they're
Sure.
going through holding this post, whatever. And then suddenly they're just alive. And yeah, I think you said something like this earlier, that once you're in a hospital and you've been really ill, that first time you get out of bed, you start putting one foot in front of the other. That's the big aha moment. That I am getting
Yeah.
better. I'm going to get out of here.
Mhm.
And if people are in that situation, you can easily redesign intensive care, stop it being so shocking and horrifying for people, and do it in such a way that you're actually saving money. And we did a
Mhm.
big cost analysis of this to figure out, okay, who's going to pay for all of this? Well,
Sure.
actually, the longer that you spend in intensive care, the more money it costs.
Mhm.
The deeper they send you down into sedation, the longer they keep you on a mechanical ventilator, the more money it costs. Shorten that by keeping people conscious and moving on a mobile ventilator. Immediately, you've cut down the time they're in that system. They do
Mhm.
not then go on to care facilities later on. They do not drain other resources within the facility, PTSD, aches and pains, all the rest of it. From a
Mhm.
personal perspective, so many, when they come out of this, have forgotten how to do their job. So they
Mhm.
look okay, they go back to work, and they realize they can't do their job. Their boss realizes they can't do their job, and pretty soon they're out of a job. The same thing happens with marriages, that you look okay, you kind
Yeah.
of act okay, but you feel that you're not really my wife. I had another wife in another world or something.
Sure.
And marriages break down.
Mhm.
And all of this has a financial impact on people. So
Yeah.
when you add it all together, it is so cost saving to don't put people in comas in the first place. Treat them like human beings. And here's the other thing. anyone who enters, nursing or becomes a doctor, they do it because they care for people. Right?
Sure.
They're invested in their recovery, and
Hmm.
they want to work with people to get them better. They do not want to work with slabs of meat that they turn every 2 hours. They just don't. There's no satisfaction in it for them either.
100%. Now, you had mentioned that you did a lot of research, online. I'm sure that you had to, uh, track down some of these coma survivors. Did you get pushback from them? Like, no, we don't want to talk about it, and you had to explain, I'm trying
Yeah.
to change the world here. Please give me your story.
Yeah, there are 3 or 4, or there were at the time, coma groups on Facebook, and the
Hmm.
first 2 I approached, oh dear, came away with my hands stung effectively.
Hmm.
People saying, "How dare you, if you've not been in a coma, write a book about comas?" And you think,
Hmm.
"Well, how do people write books about the ancient Romans?" And so on,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
So, someone's gonna do it. If we
Hmm.
wait for a coma survivor to do it, we might wait a long time. If we wait for a doctor to do it, we've been waiting 50 years and they haven't come up with the notion yet. Other people were saying, "Oh, you intend to exploit coma survivors." I had to really
Right.
struggle with this one because how might I exploit them? And I think they were worried that I would make fun of some of the events that they experienced within coma, whereas quite frankly, it's the last thing I feel like doing. So I got turned away from 2 groups. The
Hmm.
Coma Survivors group, lovely guy, the admin, Andrew, explained what I was doing, was completely up for what I was doing, and that I wanted to talk to coma survivors. I wanted to see what they suffered. I wanted to measure it up against the medical literature,
Sure.
and I wanted to do a deep dive into this. And he helped me enormously. I wasn't posting on their forum, it
Hmm.
seemed fair. But after a time, I started messaging individuals and say, "This is what I'm doing."
Hmm.
And over time, it's like no one was actually gagging to get the story out. Everybody took an awful lot of time to tell me
Sure.
their story, which I think is just right because
Right. Yeah.
I needed to explain what I was trying to do. And early on, I didn't even know what I was trying to do.
Hmm.
I explained to them the things I was discovering and getting their feedback. And
Okay.
in the course of this, they were telling me how they fared at the various stages, both within coma and afterwards. And bit by bit, I could build stories up. These were people that knew that other coma survivors had the same problems because they'd met them on Facebook groups.
Right.
Many others out there had no notion of these groups.
Hmm.
And I would put feelers out on forums like Quora and Reddit, not
Hmm.
saying, "Have you been in a coma?" but saying,
Sure.
if if you've been in a coma, do you experience things or whatever? And then people were coming up and saying, "Hey, yeah, I had this experience. I've not told anybody. I didn't tell my wife or whatever."
Hmm.
And then suddenly I was into a whole different group of people that were entirely on their own, had no
Hmm.
concept, had never told anyone before. And in
Wow.
some cases, they was so desperate to tell me that there was one gentleman that still haunts me, and he had an alternate life with a
Hmm.
wife and other kids, completely different profession, went on for a very, very long time, came out of this world, and again, everyone was like, acting their Invasion of the Body Snatchers movie,
Sure.
not acting like they were real people.
Hmm.
And he was desperate to get back to that world. And he was in therapy. He was being given drugs. What drugs do you give anyone? And he wanted to tell me, and he just kept crying. He just kept crying. He just
Hmm.
could not get it out. He
Yeah.
couldn't explain to his wife what he was feeling. And this is what I'm hoping with the book. There must be many, many people. Many are hearing this for the first time. Oh, it's a thing,
Sure.
is it? And that they haven't been able to open up and tell people because they sound like they're nuts. Get them to read
Hmm.
the book. The book will do it, and it really puts things in perspective and just shows
Hmm.
you you're experiencing. And here's the other funny thing: when people experience things within coma, they're experiencing things that the mystics, the sages, the gurus, the shaman have been seeking since the dawn of time. When,
Hmm.
when, when a mystic goes off to the darkest recesses of a cave to cut himself off from the physical world and commune with the spirit world, that's not very different from what people are
Sure.
experiencing within coma. It's as if it's a really deep form of sensory deprivation. When people do that, specific things happen. This has been shown in scientific studies. using sensory deprivation. Within a short period, like 15 minutes, you'll
Sure.
start to get optical illusions. The longer you're in there, you will see all manner of things. There's the strangest thing, like the modern equivalent of going into a cave, and it's called the dark retreat. Now, people who are deep into meditation and spiritual practices will put themselves effectively in a cave for a lengthy period of time. I spoke to a number of people that did this, including one, Emma, that ran a dark retreat in Guatemala. And the things they experienced, there's no drugs, they're just in a dark room. Within a period of time, the room will turn cathedral size. It will be thoroughly illuminated. It will be full of people, maybe full of animals, maybe living people, maybe wooden figurines, and maybe lights will be glowing from your body, and so on and so forth. These are remarkably similar to events within Coma for some people. When we showed Emma, who ran this dark retreat, some Coma survivors' accounts that we gathered, she just laughed and said, I've had all of these. She said, we've had 500 people come through our dark retreat. We interview everybody afterwards, and they are recounting all the things you say, the nightmarish events, the what we were calling them alternate lives. She's seeing them as past lives.
Okay.
That many people within a dark retreat experience a past life, but they don't experience it minute by minute, as in where should we go on vacation, what we're having for dinner. That kind of level of existence. They're just kind of witnessing them in some form.
Right.
The trigger for that would appear to be a naturally occurring psychedelic compound found in all humans, DMT. I won't try and pronounce it. And it's unethical to prod and probe a healthy individual to try and find the source of DMT. So it doesn't happen. People speculate as to where. People believe primarily it's in the pineal gland. But no one can actually tell for sure. They can find it in the system. People suffering from schizophrenia often have high concentrations of DMT in their urine. It is believed that DMT plays a significant part in the near-death experience. Because they can't do this on people, when they've used animal models in the laboratory, they've induced heart attacks in rats, for example, and found DMT production has gone up 600%. Size for size, if we had that amount of DMT in our system, we would be away within the Amazonians as if we were on ayahuasca, because it will be beyond that level. And when you look at events that people experience on ayahuasca, the key ingredient of which is DMT, they are remarkably similar to those within Coma. So we can see the triggers that there is a chemical compound when people are at the point of death, which they patently are within Coma, or when they're perceiving death, when they're finding themselves in a hospital thinking they're going to die, they are having these near-death experiences, and they're having the DMT released within their system. But when people are in a dark retreat, initially, a lot of it is horror show. You're getting like torture victims crawling towards you and then trying to touch you or stroke your hair and so on. It's absolutely horrifying. Because they've read up on everything they can about going on a dark retreat or taking ayahuasca, because they've spoken to others, and sometimes they've even got a shaman guiding them. When they come up against the horrors within these scenarios, they can deal with it because they're prepped. Someone within a coma, there's no prepping at all. So they're getting the same experiences that you might get at ayahuasca, but you really need to be ready for this, and they're not ready at all. And when they come out the other end, instead of having a group of other people to talk about the experience with, they've got no one. And the doctor's saying, sorry, pal, false memory. You didn't just spend 30 years living in the American Midwest.
We had a gentleman on that uses DMT, and he talked about kind of his preparation, where, like you said, he kind of goes into like a meditative type state, focuses on the experience he wants to have, does some deep breathing and things like that. And then sometimes he's still just kind of like, whoa, what's going on? This is more intense than what I wanted. And I asked him, I'm like, well, can you just like write a note to yourself, like you're on DMT right now that you can look at? And he's like, it doesn't really work like that. But I can't imagine like somebody just being dosed. I mean, that's got to be similar to what these people are going through, where if they're just dosed on this crazy drug and they start flipping out and they have no
Yeah,
idea, like, hey,
yeah,
we're putting you into a medically induced coma, you're going to experience some weird stuff. It's just boom, jump right into the frying pan, and it's got to be
yeah.
terrifying.
Oh, it is. And I put this question to people that had done ayahuasca in the Amazon and other people that had done dark retreats where
Hmm.
DMT was seemingly released.
Sure.
And I said, if hypothetically someone just dropped this in your coffee and you knew nothing about it, how do you think it would make you feel? And they all said, like I'd gone mad, right?
Yeah.
Da-da. Which is what coma survivors all say. So there you go. And whilst it's convenient for doctors and whatever to say, sorry, false memory, pal,
Yeah.
it is a memory nonetheless. So
Right.
what if it's false? I don't even know if this life is real or false. I don't know if
Exactly.
I'm living in a matrix or not. Right? So, but the fact remains that people are experiencing the most exquisitely beautiful, life-changing events, and people are experiencing the depths of hell way beyond anything the human imagination should be able to come up with.
Sure.
Why have they got to ignore it and just say, sorry, it's a false memory? Sorry, it's delirium.
You still have to treat it
Because
as
it's a
though it's
hospital
real.
acquired condition, they've caused this damage and they just don't want people to know about it. If
Yeah.
they've even stopped to think about it. So it's a
Hmm.
process. Like, A, I don't think about it. I don't follow patients home. I do what I'm told. And if it ever crops up, it's just a blip. It's just a
Hmm.
false memory.
Yeah.
Okay, I got all the bases covered. Next patient,
Right.
please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got 45,000 people that have these false memories, but they're all the same that happen in coma states. Have you had people that you've interacted with that are like, I am terrified to go to sleep. I do not
Yes.
want to go to sleep. That would
Yes.
be a terrifying thing, I think, for a coma survivor.
Yes, many experience horrendous events, others don't. Many experience beautiful events, others don't.
Hmm.
Those that have the really beautiful events, let's say they found themselves, it appeared that they were at the doorway of this life and the next, that it was a classical form of near death experience. They come back
Hmm.
out of that with no fear of death.
Hmm.
Okay, they're busy, got things to do, but they're quite happy to go anytime. That kind of
Sure.
general feeling. When you found yourself in a nightmare scenario, in a organ harvesting facility for
Oh my
years or
gosh.
whatever,
Wow.
um, oh yeah, and then they just go on and they go on. They're so upsetting.
Hmm.
When you find yourself in a situation like that, oh, I've lost my train of thought because simply I'm just putting myself in their mind, and you just think, you poor people.
Hmm.
No one's paying attention. And why the doctors can't just stop and say, okay, you've had a proper bad experience. We really are going to analyze it and
Hmm.
maybe just talk to other people that have been through it at the very, very least, but just ignoring them. One person said
Yeah.
to me, I wish they could give me a pamphlet, when I came out of my coma and saying, oh, by the way, you may have been in other realms, mystic and spiritual. You may have met demons and gods, but don't worry, this is well understood. It is not well understood, so it's just dismissed. It's just so awful. And one of the reasons this became a book was that I became attached very quickly to these coma survivors who were
Sure.
helping me.
Sure.
Because, to be honest, I mean, to survive a coma is quite a thing. And
Right.
you really need to be a very strong individual to come out of a coma.
Hmm.
Physically would certainly help, but mentally you've got to be very strong. More often than not, they've talked of having to fight to come back, to be back with their family. And, and,
Hmm.
and they know, in a sense, they're being drugged up and they're fighting against the drugs and they're trying to come out of them. And this effect that it has on them. Yeah, I mean, I could just go on about that side of it, but I don't want to. Um, people get a lot out of it. Those that have come out of it from the nightmare, to answer your question, don't want to sleep because their dreams have become more vivid.
Hmm.
I mean, just more real.
Yeah.
And events, they seem to have events happening post-coma that, one person said she thought she went on vacation to the island of Corfu for a week, and she's convinced of it. This is post-coma. No, they hadn't been there at all. But that was
Hmm.
now part of her memories. In the same way, going down to Walmart was part of her memories. It's just
Sure.
there. Uh, how they cope with it, I just don't know. And mostly they become reclusive. Mostly they've got post-traumatic stress disorder, which means all sorts of things can set them off.
Yeah.
A sound,
Hmm.
an image on TV of some horror event or whatever, that can set them off. They don't want to go out because something might set them off when they're in public,
Yeah.
and they just become shadows of their former selves. And the other thing that they have, they lose a filter. People will say things that we often think things, like your ass looks big in that dress. Coma's vibe will just come out and say that, not having that filter and not
Yeah.
knowing that they said anything wrong either, which is a very
Sure.
strange thing. But more than one has told me that they find themselves doing this. Odd
That is
thing to have.
strange. It's like they lose the social structure when they're in this coma, and then yeah, they don't realize like, well, I'm just being honest. That's a good thing. Yes, your butt does look big in that dress. Pick another dress. And they're really doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're saying, I'm trying to help this person, but they don't have that social awareness of, oh, I could hurt their
No,
feelings too. That's
no.
really, really sad to lose something like that. Have you
But
had
also
any?
that, go on.
No, no, go ahead, because this is
No,
going to
no,
be
I
a
was
little
going to
bit.
say, I mean, also, they don't even know the names of their grandchildren in many cases. And they're constantly having to be reminded, I'm at a kid's party. Who are these kids? So this
Yeah.
is your granddaughter,
Have you had
Sorry, you've got
anybody
to
that?
ask.
Have you had anyone? Now you mentioned the guy that came out and realized, like, oh, I can do home repairs now. Has there been
Yeah.
anybody that you've read about or heard about or anything where it's like, oh, this guy, he had these, I guess, for lack of a better term, we'll call them false memories in a coma where he learned to play guitar. And then he came out and all of a sudden he's like a savant, he's playing Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that.
Yeah, not actually. I mean, we have accounts like this in the book when we look at the strange things that happen when
Hmm.
parts of the brain switch off.
Yeah.
And there's a drug in West Africa from the root of a tree that people take as a part of a religious ceremony. And they call it having one's head broke open. And what they're
Oh.
doing is inducing a near death experience. They are in this beautiful bucolic landscape. They will meet their dead relatives. The story that we chose for the book was this cocoa planter who does it. And
Hmm.
he meets his grandfather who's sitting in a garden, and there's a small boy between his legs, and he realizes the small boy is he. And
Hmm.
as he walks up to his father, the boy turns into a harp, and the granddad is playing the harp. Long story short, he comes out of this near-death experience journey. He
Hmm.
can play the harp, and he couldn't play the
Right.
harp before. Right? And there are numerous accounts of people, for example, who suffer a brain injury, who
Hmm.
take on board various incredible savant type skills,
Yeah. Sudden
art,
savant
artistry.
syndrome.
People who've got certain kinds of dementia, for example, where parts of the brain are now no longer functioning,
Hmm.
not unlike a coma survivor. They're
Yeah.
developing artistic abilities of different kinds, remarkable artistic abilities. We give the case of one poor chap who banged his head on the bottom of a swimming pool on the concrete base.
Hmm.
And when he was in a right mess, and he didn't go to hospital, but he stayed at a friend's house. And when he came out of this very, very prolonged deep sleep,
Hmm.
he went to the basement, and there was an electric piano there. He never touched a piano before in his life. And for the next 6 hours, he just entertains his friends by
Hmm.
playing them song after song after song. And he's given up work now as a sales trainer and is a full-time composer and musician. Now,
That's
these
great.
things for sure
Hmm.
happen. In Vietnam, there's a study group, the Vietnam Head Injury Group,
Hmm.
and they look at people who've had head injuries in Vietnam. and their connection to spiritual experiences. Many times someone gets blown up in a truck or whatever, and perhaps no physical injury, but they find themselves having an out-of-body experience. That's more common than one would imagine. Amongst the military generally, particularly in the world we're living in now, near-death experiences are far more common than they are amongst the public at large, because so often a soldier will find themselves in a situation and not know whether they're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
When I was researching the book, I spoke to one expert on near-death experiences, and she said, ask amongst your friends and see if they've had any NDEs, because once you ask, people will tell you, but they wouldn't have necessarily volunteered.
Sure.
Amongst my circle of friends, two other friends are journalists who do wars. They both had close calls within wars, one in Burma, one in Cambodia, and both had near-death experiences, somewhat different, but they had classic near-death experiences as they perceived they were at the point of death. It is happening to people, and they never shared it. Yeah. Because, I'm a roughy, toughy war correspondent.
Right.
I'm not going to share stuff like that. But when asked, they did. So these events, they're happening, from a head injury, from, having, meningitis, from having all manner of things go wrong within your brain and having other events happen. And some people like Carl Jung believe that we carry within us the collective subconscious, the knowledge of humanity, and that under certain circumstances, whatever filters being employed to stop us gaining direct access to that gets opened, which allows people to have these remarkable artistic abilities that, and so on and so forth. And we see within Coma that the key element that regulates our conscious reality in the brain, the area known as the default mode network, it switches off. When it switches off, when people take psychedelics, their brain is seen to have minimal activity in it, rather than lighting up like a Christmas tree, as one might expect. When they've put Buddhist monks on MRI scanners and the EEG brain scanners, again, when they've been in the deepest states of transcendental meditation, they're experiencing so much, nothing is registering on the EEG, and yet their mind is incredibly active. This for sure is what's happening within Coma. You have switched off a key element of the brain. In this instance, you've removed the filter, which allows for this expansion of consciousness. And when people recount many of the different types of events within Coma, as I was saying earlier, there's remarkable parallels to the psychedelics, to the DMT, the ayahuasca journeys, the psilocybin, to magic mushrooms, and these feelings that people are experiencing within Coma are being readily experienced by other people outside of Coma, and always have been since the dawn of time. There's evidence going back that humans have been experimenting with psychedelics since way before the dawn of time, millions of years back. So we've always been seeking these things. So in many ways, they're well documented. You go back to the days of King Solomon. He almost wrote a roadmap, as it were, to the journeys that can be taken when you put a magic carpet over your head and inhale the esoteric parts of a toad and so on in a cave. Right? Yeah. The things that they are experiencing, the things they are seeking, much like the cocoa planter in West Africa, much like the person within Coma, they are experiencing those things. The cocoa planter and the person doing DMT have a knowledge of what's about to happen. The coma survivor does not.
Right.
As we keep coming back to, they're left entirely on their own. There will be people listening now, watching now, who've been in a coma or had family members in a coma. And aside from the fact that, the usual questions, could you hear people talking to you when we came in and held your hand? Beyond that, nobody asked many questions. And people don't venture these things that's happened to them. So there will be a lot of people, and statistically, there will be people listening now.
Sure.
When we talk of Coma and the terrible events, it's not like some disease you're going to read about online, that's never going to get here, that's killing people and terrible things are happening.
Right.
This statistically can happen to any one of us if we live in the Western world. If you live in the Western world, Yeah, less likely to die immediately in an accident or whatever. You're more likely to get progressively unwell.
Mhm.
And in the worst case scenarios, you find yourself in an intensive care unit. Statistically, we can expect between 2 and 3 stays in an intensive care unit in our lives in the Western world.
Mhm.
If we were to go today and we had, let's say, a heavy respiratory problem such as pneumonia, they would very likely put you in a coma, even though there's nothing in the medical
Mm.
paperwork that says you should. And this can happen to any single one of us. And the events within the book, from the absolutely ghastly through to the staggeringly beautiful or the abjectly weird, can easily happen to you. No one will give you an explanation. And when you come out of
Sure.
that, you won't remember how to use a knife and fork. You won't remember what your parents' names are. And you feel like death for the rest of your life. You feel like death warmed up.
Yeah. I mean, if they say it's false memories, then I mean, what do they call it when you forget how to do something? Is that like a stolen memory, or I mean, it's
Yeah.
like I
I
understand.
don't,
Go ahead.
no, go on, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I understand, the doctors are just told this is what it is, this is what you do, and this is how we treat this symptom. And then they have the easy explanation of false memories, you were hallucinating, you were delirious. How do they explain, if at all, why people lose the abilities they had before they went into the coma, or the memories
Yeah,
they had before they went
yeah.
in? Is it just
You
another thing
see,
where they're like, just part of the coma?
I think a lot of people will be told, like, if you've got an initial memory problem, it's normal. That everybody goes through this. It will come
Sure.
back to you. This is a blip, effectively. Um, so when you find yourself not coming out of that, you're likely to get a diagnosis from another doctor of early onset, dementia.
Oh.
But people will lose all manner of skills. Helping us with the book is the composer Stephen Watkins, who was in a coma.
Mhm.
And when he came out of his coma, he lost the ability to compose music. He can write down what
Wow.
someone's playing, and he can't do anything other than that. He has
Ah,
no desire to create music. And he says, that part of my brain has gone. I can't find it anymore.
oh,
And
that's so sad.
and then he said, who do I see about that? You go to your local doctor and say, oh, I've lost the ability to compose. Have you got any good tablets for that? And there's nothing. So people will keep it to themselves and just
Mhm.
think, this is me. This is something that's happened to me. In the same way that someone has, say, a coronary heart bypass operation lasting 4 to 6 hours, and they never feel the same again. They never feel quite as bubbly and bright as they were.
Yeah.
What do they do? And they just think it's me. And I think an awful lot of people who are going through, say, dementia, the regular style of dementia, will hide that, will keep
Mm.
it from their nearest and
Yeah.
dearest because of the fear of people finding out. So it's
Yeah.
got to be very, very similar for those within coma, thinking, like, I can't do this. I can't remember how to make coffee, and,
Mhm.
and not wanting to own up to it,
Yeah.
and then not having coffee.
Yeah.
And that would be it. That would be how they're living.
Now, for me, I know if I went into a coma, and I guess, like, you really don't have a whole lot of choice in your treatment. They can say, well, this is what we do, take it or leave it. And I would want headphones on the whole time, playing different like beta waves, theta waves, alpha waves, in hopes that that may be able to, trigger a sleep like state where maybe it's, and uh, obviously there's not a whole lot to back this up. This is just kind of what I believe. I believe in frequency and sound healing and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
yeah. I
what
get it.
advice do you have if, say a listener has a family member that's in a coma, whether it's medically induced or not? What can they do, aside
Yeah.
from spending time with the person? Is there anything they can do to try and ease this, or help with it at all?
Okay. If it was anyone I cared for, even if it was somebody I didn't care for, I would fight tooth and nail to prevent them being placed into a medically induced coma. My argument would be we're up for this. Great idea. Can you just prove to me that it works? But we
Mhm.
need proof. Like, can you just show me an article or something showing that this works? And they can't. They just
Okay.
can't. So you just say, well, until you can do that, we're going to go for this other options. And
Sure.
the other options would be, let me give you an example, which is in the book, you might say, of the LDS hospital in Salt Lake City, where
Mhm.
they do not place people into medically induced comas. They have exactly the same range of illnesses and ailments that every
Sure.
other intensive care unit experiences. And invariably, their patients walk out
Wow.
rather than being pushed on a gurney to a care facility down the line. And many have learnt from this. And,
Many
you
have
know,
not.
we're, that many have not. But it's you can just see how it goes. You know, they've done their training. They're so busy. Who's got the time to keep up to speed with this? I didn't necessarily want to be in intensive care anyway. I'm not going to pursue my career, and I'll just do what I'm told for the moment. And this
Yeah.
is how it's working. This is how it's working. You know, it is, and I hate to use the word, but it's a crime of ignorance
Mhm.
because no one is sets out to harm a patient. I mean, they just don't.
Absolutely.
And
No.
what they really want is the joy, is seeing them bringing people back from the maul of death and see
Yeah.
them leaving with a smile on their face, going back to their family and their occupation. That must be where the job satisfaction comes from, not
Sure.
wheeling one down the corridor and wheeling another one in. There can't be any, you know, as well work in a chicken factory or something. You know,
Right.
there can't be any satisfaction in that.
So you mentioned earlier that one of the people you talked to said that they would like to have a pamphlet that would be handed to them. This is what's going on. Well, now they have a whole book. So that's something, I mean, that would be a great gift for someone that is going to be coming out or, you know, has recently or 10 years ago came out and doesn't understand it.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
need this book for sure because, like you said, it just hasn't been done. And it's so
no,
crazy. And when I came across the book on the publisher's website, and I was just like shocked. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I never even thought about this.
no,
How was
no,
this the first time hearing about this?" So,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, is there anything that we missed, or you think that about wraps it
Well,
up for now?
there's about 100,000 words in the
Sure.
book. It takes
Well,
about
we
12
missed a
hours.
lot, but
So
yeah.
yes, but I think we've done fairly well in the short time allocated to us. No, we've done very well.
All
Um,
right.
thank you for sort of saying that because it is vitally important that that the relief people will feel. It won't be an easy read for them. The book
Sure.
itself is a very easy read. We've set out to make it as, you know, as exciting and interesting and jaw dropping as possible,
Yeah.
whilst filling you in on all the facts. I
Mhm.
think, let's supposing you were placed into a medically induced coma because you had COVID-19, and you read in the book that you did not need to be, then you look at all the problems that you're suffering with post coma, and these are identical symptoms to those for other people.
Mhm.
Not an easy read, but suddenly you'll feel, whoa, I'm not on my own. You
Yeah.
know, I get it. And then for those that have been entirely on their own, we show where they can meet other people online and
Mhm.
share their experiences and get help. I mean,
Yeah.
just odd things that happen. Their hair just tends to fall out, their fingernails tend to fall out.
Mm.
And for a lot of people, there's just like, how do I deal with this? Is my hair going to come back? And people
Yeah.
can say 3 years down the line, mine has just started coming back. And then you've got points of reference, you know, I'm 5 years down the line and I'm feeling a lot better. I went jogging for the first time today.
Mhm.
And you're giving people hope and all the rest of that, because otherwise they haven't got any hope. And you know, keep saying invasion of the body snatchers. Nothing is real. Just nothing
Yeah.
is real. They don't feel that they're the person that, let's say, their partner married. They're just pretending to be that person. They may be still pretending to do the job they used to do and having panic attacks because they don't know where this goes or where that goes.
Yeah.
And they're in the most terrible mess. So once you can see that it's happening to others, I think it's going to bring great relief.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, those that have difficulty explaining what they've been through, both in coma and post coma, show that to those people that they want to know. You know, this is what I've
Absolutely.
been through, and there's no shame in what they've done. And as
No.
I said earlier, those that survive coma are strong. They're really strong people. And, you might be listening now and thinking, I don't feel strong. But you've come back, and that means you are very strong. And whatever physical strength you've got, and you must have a lot to have got this far, right, will help you get, you will never be 100%. I'm so sorry to say that. You will never be 100%.
Yeah.
But there are people, certainly two within the book, who've come out really benefited from the experience. One is a hospital chaplain in Birmingham, Alabama, who was burning out. He families who are dealing with bereavement. He's been counseling people that are near death. And he reckons something in the order of 15,000 people in his career as a hospital chaplain. He was just burning out. He just didn't know what to say anymore. He died in his coma, actually clinically died, was resuscitated. He went to heaven. He said, he's Christian. He said, I didn't see God. I didn't see Christ. Nothing like that. But I saw a mountain of light, and I felt such peace and beauty and comfort. And I just know, and he's using the word God. Other people might just say the universe, whatever.
Sure.
That there is more to this life, and that the passing from this life to that life is an exquisitely beautiful thing. Yeah. When he's talking to people in the hospital, he's got complete faith. And when he talks of an afterlife, he can give them an eyewitness account. So he's really come out of that well. Another one of the coma survivors, one of the few that had a complete blank, who remembers nothing within his coma, he's come out the other end determined to give more convalescent blood plasma, whatever that is, right, than any other living person in Britain. And he's survived COVID, and he's giving this blood, and he's running marathons, and he's doing all sorts of things. And I've got other people who can't go to the door to get the newspaper. And yet here he is. So it affects everyone differently, but it's given him a whole purpose in life because he feels he's giving back to the system. It's given the hospital chaplain a whole purpose in life because he can tell somebody, a family of a patient within coma, what they might be experiencing. And he can tell the doctors, for heaven's sake, never discuss the patient's condition in front of them when they're in a coma, because certainly in the hospital chaplain, Corey, his case, he could hear everything. He could hear them saying to his fiancée, he won't survive the night. We've tried the last of the antibiotics. There's no more to try. And he has to listen to all of this. And he can tell his doctors now at that hospital, don't do that. Just do it in the corridor. Simple things. So, some have come out terribly damaged. Others come out as repaired human beings. And they're giving so much back as a consequence. So there's for everyone.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a fascinating topic, but it's great that there's, a message of hope at the end too. Like you've come this far. You can get your life back. And that's a wonderful gift to give somebody.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we set out to investigate a highly dubious medical procedure, and it led us on spiritual paths. And I was shocked to discover that we've written a spiritual book, because there's only one place to go when you're investigating where are people going within coma. And they're clearly going to the same realms and dimensions that other people have been to, that have charted and catalogued their journeys. And here are coma people doing that. And so we know it's real. So it has changed my outlook from just like thinking dead meant dead to now firmly believing that we don't die. And, just to keep it on a scientific level, we're all energy. This is patently obvious. We're all energy, and that's proven. And the first law of thermodynamics says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So when a person is a ball of energy and they die in this world, where's that energy go then? It's going to go somewhere. So, and when you talk to people who have left their bodies and have gone off to other realms, be it within coma or be it within a scientific experiment with DMT or in a dark cave or whatever, these places exist. And you can't just keep dismissing them as being false because, as I say, you can go back to the days of King Solomon. You can go back way further than that to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And they're cataloguing the different stages of death And these are the different stages, seemingly, that coma survivors are going through. When you look at the Buddhist texts, there's the Bardo, the 6 stages between this life and the next. And people are clearly within the Bardos, as described in the Buddhist faith.
Sure.
So you can't just dismiss it. And the biggest problem, ultimately, is that the modern scientific world limits itself, as I said earlier, to only things that they can weigh or measure or see.
Right.
And beyond that, they just won't go. But we're now changing. Because of the quest for artificial intelligence, people are determined now to get a better grip on consciousness rather than ignore it. So that's taking place. We've got the quantum realms now being explored, and that's turning a lot of conventional science on its head. And there's an awful lot to be learned between where the quantum realms may take us and where people within coma are going, as in there are other dimensions, we don't see them, but the quantum science points to other realms very, very clearly. People within coma, people on DMT are visiting other realms. When you send 2 people, let's say a husband and wife, take DMT together, they have the same experience together. They're seeing the same things happening. I spoke to a couple that do it recreationally, and they're in their living room and they see what they call tree elves. Other people within DMT call them electric elves.
Sure.
And they're running around the room, and one of them's playing with a record player and he's going to break it. And they both get up at the same time to save the record player hitting the deck. Now, how's that happen? Yeah. So clearly they are in other realms, and I can't dismiss them. We have come to this completely with open eyes, and we've not dismissed anything. And we've been just shocked and wonderfully surprised by the journey that we've been taken on. And I would now, gone from a hard-nosed journalist to now describe myself as somebody who's spiritual, only because I've seen the evidence, and I am convinced.
Well, it's great that led you to that too. I mean, it's got to be satisfying to know that your book is actually going to help people that maybe just didn't have a resource before, because there's a lot of people that write self-help books, and I know this isn't technically a self-help book, but there's a lot of people that write books like that, and it's like, well, there's 500 other authors that wrote the same exact book with a little bit different title, but this is not out there. This is new.
No one's been here before. And people listening now are hearing that there are events within coma for the very, very first time, and that coma isn't this wonderful beneficial tool, a marvel of modern medicine. It is precisely the opposite. And you could knock me over with a feather when I found that one out, because I'm starting off from the basis that it's an essential tool in critical care, and then I get categorical evidence, proof, people putting their hands up and saying, with the best will in the world, I have killed patients. And you have to stop and think. And when you see the difference between those who've been through the mill with coma and those that have come out of hospitals like the LDS in Salt Lake City, they're just fine. They're just like anyone who's been in hospital for whatever, appendicitis or something, and they've come out the other end. Okay, they're a bit dicky and stuff. They take a little while to get properly back on their feet, but they are not wrecks. They are not physical wrecks pretending to be people that they don't believe they are. No.
Well, now I have to go rewatch Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and then I know that if I'm ever in a compromised situation, I need to fly out to Utah to get my treatment. So, can you can you tell everybody where the book is available again? I know you said brick and mortar, but do you have a website they can go to learn more?
Well, I mean, I just buy books wherever you buy books. On my website, alanpearce.com. If you're looking on screen, you can see my name. It's that with a .com at the end. I would just rather you went to anywhere. Yeah, wherever you buy books. I mean, it's that easy. And I prefer, paper books and going to a paper store and buying them. But hey, and the audiobook, I'm really looking forward to hearing this audiobook come out. There's a lot of work's gone into this, and it's not an easy one to read.
Sure. A lot of
The
medical
the
terminology,
the
I'm
act,
sure.
yeah, the book's having an odd effect on people as well. Danny, Painter, who narrates the book, just before we were in negotiations, her husband died, and she said, "Yeah, I'm going to go ahead with this." And so she reads the book, but she's actually really rather famous actress in South Africa. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of doors open to her. And she spoke to a lot of religious and spiritual leaders, including Nelson Mandela's former spiritual leader.
Wow.
And she said, talking to them about the death of my husband and reading your book has given me more peace in knowing that he isn't dead and I am going to see him again. Because that's how I feel. Didn't set
Yeah.
out to write that, but that's the conclusion the book has taken us to. And it's proof. It's all proven. All of it, everything is proven.
That's amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's morning for me, but you're in lovely Paris, you lucky man, you. So it's late afternoon for you. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, and you have a wonderful evening, and we will talk to you soon.
Jay, thank you so much for having me, and really important that you get to talk about the book, and thank you for sharing it with your audience. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon then. Thank you. That's all we've got for you tonight on Cryptique. You can check out our TikTok at Cryptique Podcast. YouTube, which we're putting out new videos for all the shows, is at Cryptique Podcast. And you can find us on X or Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, at Podcast Evil. We're on Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. Definitely check out our YouTube channel, though, like I said, because we put out a video version of the show, the slides and videos sometimes, and we are doing paranormal video analysis on some of our shows now. Let us know about your worst nightmares at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. For a small one-time donation, you can buy us a cup of coffee, buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. Check out our slick designs on t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, pint glasses, and stickers at cryptiquepodcaststore.com. In the words of an unknown coma survivor, surviving a coma taught me that life is fragile, but the will to live is stronger than we ever imagined. Good evening, Crypt Keepers.